Welcome back to The Long Way Home. I'm your host, Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're talking about raising kids. Now, this is relevant to me in multiple ways, three of which are that I have three kids. And I've learned a lot over the time that I have since my oldest was born to now. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that and the differences in how my kids were raised compared to how I was raised, and kind of dig into not necessarily what was right and wrong, but maybe some things that I would have done different, or some things that I wish my mom would have done different, for instance. So let's start off. I'll talk about my kids. So my oldest is about to be, as of this recording, she's about to turn 18 years old. Uh, the fact that I was the fact that I was able to raise a child to be 18 is mind-boggling to me. I wasn't even able to keep a goldfish alive for more than a couple of weeks. So having kids and raising them, uh, getting them to that point, and not to mention my youngest daughter she's going to turn 17 here in a couple of months, and then my son, he just turned 14. So we're rolling right along. There was a little bit of difference, a little bit of age gap there between the last two. But there's been so many things that I just didn't expect as a parent. There's been so many things that nothing, I don't think any piece of advice could have really prepared me for necessarily. And, I'll start with talking about when my first child was born, my oldest daughter, because my wife and we had been together since we were seniors in high school, and we had, as I talked in a previous video about relationships, we had split up when we got back together, and then we'd moved in together, and we found out about a month and a half after we moved in together that we were pregnant with our first child. Now, we hadn't been planning this. We hadn't been really expecting it. Although looking back, like I should say, probably wasn't exactly unexpected considering we just moved in together. But it was a scary thought, the fact that, like, I'm going to be a dad. And when I thought back over my life, and I thought, I didn't have necessarily a very good role model in the way of a father, in the way of a dad. My dad, my birth father, and my mother got divorced when I was about 10 years old, and he was all right. I don't want to say he was a bad father or bad dad. We had moments. We played games together, and he had a lot of fun with us. But he also was still learning things. He was still trying to figure out how to be a dad himself. So he got a lot of things wrong. And then my mom made tons and tons of mistakes, if I look back on it as an adult. First and foremost, one of the biggest mistakes that she ever made, I think, was when she got remarried and basically told me and my brothers that our father didn't want us anymore, which was a complete bullshit lie. And so she kind of screwed that up for us. But on top of that, like, she was very controlling, at times she could be manipulative. And she loved us. She cared about us. She wanted the best for us. But her way of showing it was very, I don't want to say fundamentalist. She had some flaws. Let me just say that. We grew up with the paddle. She had the spare the rod, spoil the child mentality of, you have to beat the kids in order to get them to do anything or pay to listen to you. And so when I first became a father, I thought that was the way of doing things. I thought, if your kids don't listen to you, you spank your kids, and that's the way to do it. And it took me a long time to realize that was wrong, and that I shouldn't do that because that is not a productive way of doing things. I had a ton of issues. I was way too young to be a father, way too mature to be a father, and I made a lot of mistakes along the way. But I learned from those mistakes, which I think is different in some ways than others, with especially, and I focus heavily on my mom because realistically, like I said, I didn't have a good father figure. And the two men in my life that I consider dads really made a lot of mistakes, weren't really as heavy in my life as far as like a positive role model as my mom was. For all her faults, she was a positive role model in a lot of ways. She expected me to treat women a certain way, for instance, respect women, and so I was taught some good things growing up, but the example wasn't always the best. And her philosophy, I think, like a lot of other, I think she would be considered Gen X. No, maybe, yeah, probably Gen X. A lot of people born in the '60s, right? They had this philosophy because of how their parents raised them, that children are to be seen and not heard, but they also should be seen a little bit because the prior generations hated the way that their parents acted, and I think that's kind of a standard thing, is parents not liking the way that the prior generation did things, right? So it was kind of this mixed bag where sometimes we were told to be free thinkers, and then a lot of times we were told not to be free thinkers and to kind of hide our emotions and act a specific way. We were raised very, I don't want to say fundamentalist Christian, because we weren't really fundamentalists, but we did have a lot of we listened to Carmen, I guess. If you have ever been involved in Christianity and Christian rock music, and you'll know who Carmen is. That was the kind of household I was brought up in. And so when I became a father, I was like, okay, well, my kids need to listen to me. They should be seen and not heard, because this is the way that I was raised. And then I learned over the years to get better at that, and to become a more caring, listening father. I try to guide my children through things by having conversations with them. And I think if I could go back and do things over, I think I would have tried to change the way I acted when they were younger, because I never really wanted kids. I wasn't, my wife wanted the kids. I was like, I want to go out and adventure and do things. And then we got pregnant, and it was like, okay, now we're having kids. And this is the thing. I'm going to be there for them, unlike my father, who was not there for me. And I want to do this the right way. But the problem was little kids, especially, toddlers, babies, toddlers, even into the late single digit years, they aren't great at having conversations. They can't grasp the bigger concepts of right and wrong. And teaching kids right and wrong is a very difficult concept at times, because you're trying to teach them these actions individually are right or wrong. And I think if I could do it differently, rather than teaching specific actions are right or wrong, I should have been teaching morals. I think a lot of people, when you get into the idea of morality and stuff, they'll focus on their religion and whatnot. But realistically, I should have been teaching them morals and how to determine what's right and wrong. And that's something that, as they grew older, I started doing. I feel like I got better at that as they got older, to the point where now, when I was 18, when my wife and I first met, we were 18 years old. We were seniors in high school. And I was constantly frustrated with my parents and her parents, because they had this idea of, you're going to do what we tell you to, you're going to do it on our schedule. We don't care that you're 18, you're still in high school, you're still a child, all this bullshit, right? And I told myself, when my kids get to that age, I'm not going to do that, because the way I viewed it was, my parents should have trusted me, and they should have trusted the way that they raised me, that I would make the right choices based on how they'd raised me. And they refused to do that. And so I told myself, when my kids are older, I'm going to treat them like young adults, like they are. And I think I've done a pretty good job of doing that. Like I said, my oldest is about to turn 18. And for the most part, it's kind of, the right from wrong, you know what to do. And I want to live in their head as like a little Jiminy Cricket, in a way. I want them, when they're going to do something, when they're trying to make a decision, to think, what would Dad say? And, I think that's something to aim for, because I've gone through all of this stuff. And rather than telling them, because my parents had this habit of well, we've done this and I've been there and I can tell you not to do this thing, I would rather my kids, rather than telling them, I've been there, you shouldn't do this because I failed at it, telling them, try these things, but be careful about how you go about things. and I'm not going to be there to tell you what to do right and wrong, you know. And my oldest, she's going off to basic training next summer. She's going to graduate from high school at the end of May, and she's going off to basic training in early June. And I'm like, once you get out there, you're out in the real world. And I want you to be prepared for that. And I want you to be able to fail safely at home and learn from those failures safely at home before you do that. So I give my kids kind of a long leash, I guess you would say. Go out, have fun, experiment, be safe, and think before you act, think before you speak. And I think that all in all, I wish I would have done that from the beginning in a lot of ways. And I wish that my parents would have done that for me, because raising kids, the goal of raising kids should be to create productive members of society. It should be to get your kids to the point where they can be good, caring members who can go out there and into the world, and they can work a job, they can meet people, they can be a positive influence, bring positive change. And that's something that I really heavily focus on. There's an election coming up. I won't tell my daughter who to vote for, but I give her all of the information, and I encourage her to go out and learn her own things. She has made the decision of who she's going to vote for based off of that. But it's because I've taught her to be a critical thinker. I've taught all of them to be a critical thinker and look for things and understand the world in a different way. Get all of the information before you make a decision. And I think in the long term, that's going to serve them better than trying to say this action is right, this action is wrong. You shouldn't have to be told what particular actions are. It's not like memorizing the math tables when you were in school. You had to memorize the math tables and just know all the answers. You don't know all the answers, and you're going to come across things daily that you just don't know, and you got to look back at your moral compass, and you got to be like, okay, what is the right thing to do in this situation? And so that's what I've been kind of pushing all of my kids toward, and try to get them where they can go out into the world in the next few years and actually be happy, healthy, productive members of society, and do the right thing when situations come up that might be a little bit difficult. So I think I pretty much covered. I didn't have a lot of points to talk about with this one. I wanted to talk briefly about it because as a parent of a child that's about to turn 18, another child that's about to be 17, a child that in 4 years will be turning 18, I've learned along the way, like, it's a lot easier said than done, and you can go wrong in a million different ways. I know kids of other parents who the parents are clamped down on them. The parents won't allow them to do certain things. They, and the more you tell a kid not to do something, the more they want to do it. I remember that being a teenager. And that's the thing. I think my parents forgot what it was like to be a teenager. By the time that I was a teenager, they had forgotten. And rather than realizing that, well, if I tell them no, they're going to want to do it, and making decisions differently based on that, they decide to just double down. And you can't really do that. My wife and I, like I said, we met in high school, and there were things that we did that we never would have done if our parents would have just been lenient with us. We ran away twice together, once over a weekend and once over the course of lasted for like a month. We were moved out of our houses, because they were so restrictive and so clamped down. And, oh, I don't care if you're 18, as long as you live under my roof, and that's bullshit. There is no as long as you live under my roof stuff. That doesn't do anybody any good. And any parent out there, you might be listening to this saying, well, that's the way that I do things. And are you telling me that I'm wrong? Yes, I'm telling you that you're wrong. Because the end result, what you get out of that, never winds up being good. If anything, it winds up being a strained relationship. And you should not live your life of thinking to yourself, someday they're going to understand the way that I think. No, you should be living your life of how can I teach them right from wrong? How can I teach them to think about others, to put others ahead of themselves, to be leaders, because that's what a leader is to put others ahead of yourself. And I push that very hard with all of my kids. My kids are the kind of kids that if somebody is struggling at school, they'll go help them. They'll stand up for them. They'll be the ones that will speak out when there's a problem, because I have taught them right from wrong, because I have taught them how to think critically and how to really pay attention to the world around them and what other people are doing. Whereas you have other kids out there who their parents have clamped down on them. Their parents have, rather than teach them right from wrong, their parents have just been like, you're going to follow my rules as long as you live under my roof. And that's just not a productive way to do things. So I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. This is going to be one of the first podcasts that I've uploaded since I went live on platforms across the board. So I started out this podcast on Patreon only. I expanded it to YouTube in June. I think it was around June. And now I'm expanding even further to every podcasting platform. So if you are listening to this on someplace other than YouTube, you can find me on YouTube. You can find me on the website, Josh Bearheart Hawk. I've got joshbearhartlegendsandtales.com. I've got all of that stuff. So you can find me there. And I'm interested in hearing people's thoughts because, this is, I want these to be kind of a conversation. I want these to kind of drive home the idea that, the world has changed a lot in the last 4 decades, but there's still a lot of things out there that are worth looking into and worth, discussing. And so I want to have those discussions and talk about those things because the way I was raised and the way I raised my kids, I'm not perfect. And it's not the only way. And I want to hear other people's takes. So with that being said, I want to thank you all for watching. If you're on YouTube, I want to thank you for watching. If you're on YouTube, everywhere else, I want to thank you for listening. There's going to be more episodes. I'm trying to up the schedule. I'm trying to get more episodes out and talk. I was doing these once a week. I'm trying to get to 3 a week. So there should be a lot more coming down the pipe. I've got a lot of really cool plans and a lot of awesome stuff coming into the holidays. So stay tuned for all of that. Make sure you follow, subscribe. I don't know how that works on other podcasting platforms. If you're on YouTube, subscribe, like, all that good stuff. And everybody have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.